Vetri, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation. Congratulations on the book. As an author, I know how hard it is to write a book. Before we get into what you're talking about in the book, would you give me a couple minutes on your background and what led you to this space of OKRs and goals and how did you come here?
Wow, great question. Thanks, Josh, for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's been fun. I've been reading up on your stuff for a long time now and really admire your work. My journey to OKRs, Josh, to be honest, started in two ways, right? One was way back, almost 20 years back or 25 years back when I read this book called Strategy Aligned Organization, right, from Harvard Business Press. And it just changed how I thought about work, right? For me, that was the first time I realized how an entire organization can be beautifully aligned and rowing the same direction. It was not called OKRs back then, but a lot of those concepts, again, I got exposed again, right, about 10 years ago when I was doing my previous startup, the one before Ally. When the company was small, just 30, 40 people, I was struggling. And I realized that you need a new framework to run a fast paced organization. And I came across OKRs and I started using them. After some initial missteps, it worked phenomenally well for us, and then that became our business.
It's funny, I had exactly the same experience when I was starting our first company. I read the balanced scorecard, which is like ancient history.
Yeah.
It's probably like in the 1970s. And I walked out of that book thinking, why don't we do this inside our company? But it's harder than it looks. So let me give you, quickly, what is the high level message in the book about OKRs that you want people to understand? Then we'll talk a little bit about what the details are.
Yeah, I mean, Josh, as you know, right, OKRs are not new per se. The objective and key result, the goal setting framework has been used by many successful organizations, but it's finally getting the attention it deserves, right? And it's still very new to most organizations. So the book is really about how do we address these big concepts as OKRs that are still not well understood because organizations are new. So in working with lots of organizations, I've realized a lot of these misconceptions out there. Like, for example, OKRs are only for the leadership team, not for the entire organization, things like that. So one thing the book tries to do is actually provide a clear idea of what OKRs are and how do you actually use them to improve business performance and employee engagement. The second thing I realized was, while the concept is simple, many of the organizations I work with are struggling to adopt it, right, on a regular basis, make it natural part of the fabric. And I want to provide a practical guide that actually allows people to understand the benefits and then how do you really start the journey and go there successfully.
Well, let me give you sort of a difficult question to answer because I just talked with a reporter about this morning. If you go back in time, my experience looking at goal systems goes back to the 80s when we had cascading goals.
Mm-hmm.
And management. It was called management by objectives at the time, and you would kind of get your MBOs, and at the end of the year you'd get a bonus. And what I discovered in my early of my HR career was that it looked good on paper, and everybody thought GE could do it. We can do it. If GE does it, we want to do it. And then what they found was, a couple months into the year, all these goals were kind of a little bit out of date, and they were holding us back from doing the new thing we now need to do 6 months later. And so I think a lot of companies have been frustrated by the process. Have you figured out, or how do you think OKRs prevent that, kind of institutionalization and an overwork of the process that gets in the way of actually getting the work done?
That's right. Work about work, right? And to be honest, Josh, that's where the idea of a startup or a product, a software product, dawned on me. Because I was trying to do OKRs, I'm trying to be efficient. I was trying to actually see whether I can do it in spreadsheets, on PowerPoint. And what I realized was the work about the work was too much when you use such systems, because you're trying to align an entire organization, not just a small set of people. And I really think the time for software well integrated with other systems in the enterprise makes a huge difference. The time has come and makes a huge difference in how you reduce the friction of doing OKRs and make it easy for people to enter the process and quickly see the benefits. It is still a journey. I don't want to overplay this, right? It is still a journey because it's not like the thing you're doing on paper, just do it on software. it is a transformation for many organizations. You go from thinking about activity and projects to outcomes and business benefits, right? So it is a journey, but software plays a huge role in reducing the work about work that you rightfully called out.
Well, yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think one of the things that's different, if I look at, your company, which is now part of Microsoft, and some of the other companies I've talked to, I've been on the board and now advisory board of BetterWorks, Workboard. There's actually a lot of OKR tools companies that some of them have done well, some of them have not. What was your secret to getting your company to grow so fast? Because it's actually kind of a challenging market with all sorts of other things in the market that are making noise about this.
That's right. There's so many adjacencies too, right? So I think there are a lot of great products out there. I mean, some of the companies you mentioned, they are great companies, have great products. I think we had 3 insights that made a big difference for Ally to get to a much faster acceleration. The first one is most people are new to OKRs, and the concept and the software has to be extremely simple to get them easy into it. So what we did was make the software fundamentally extremely simple and easy, but we also built in best practices. For example, how do you write a good OKR? Things like that are built into the software. So people don't have to spend
kind of tool tips, so you don't have to sit around, scratch your head and figure out how to do this.
What is this concept, right? So the concept and software kind of come together into one entity in the software. The second thing we realized was the work about work, right? It would take people a lot of time to go and update their OKRs and objectives and use it effectively. So they'll write these OKRs and then put it on the side, right? Go back to how they were doing work. And that's not the impact we want to have. And so we built a lot of integrations. In fact, we have the highest number of integrations, to my knowledge, to many software systems in the enterprise. And that made a lot of difference because your KRs get automatically updated. You don't have to tell people, can you please update this, and so on. The last one we realized was you have to be in the flow of work, right? You cannot be yet another piece of software, right? And in fact, very early on, Ally was the company that started building OKRs right into the tools that are on the flow of work, like Slack and then Teams, and now Microsoft, Azure DevOps, and Jira, all the other places where people are doing work. You want to bring purpose and goals to those places rather than distract people and have people go to another tool.
Okay, well, I want to ask you about Teams in a minute and Viva, but first, one more question. So if I, understand the history of OKRs, I think it sort of started in software companies, I believe. I don't know where the original concept came from, where there's lots of small projects and people are checking in things with each other and they're all interdependent. But then you look at sales, marketing, finance, operations, logistics, etc. What have you found? I mean, how has it changed as you move into all these other domains? And are there places where it doesn't work?
Yeah. Wow.
I stumped you.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, Josh. It is, I'll say, what I would say is I've not yet found a place where it does not work, but there are places where it seems to get much easier traction. Let me put it that way. The places where it gets much easier traction are, as you pointed out, right, in the technology parts of the organization, your IT team, your software development, product teams. The other places where I found actually it's much easier, the teams embrace and get a lot of value more quickly is in marketing. And the places where it seems to take a little longer, to be honest, is in places like sales, right? I was surprised because sales teams set goals all the time.
Well,
but the problem is with the OKRs, right?
I think I have a hypothesis for that. I think software development and marketing is very granular and activity oriented. Some of these bigger jobs like sales are very long-term, complex projects that are sometimes indeterminate. I mean, you don't know when you're going to close a deal. I mean, you can't just say we're going to get it done by the end of the month. Sometimes it's impossible. So I do think one of the things I've seen is a lot of companies who use OKRs, they use them in certain parts of the company, but they also have other goal setting or performance management tools for other parts of the company or other systems.
I do see that, Josh. You're right. I do see that. What I've seen increasingly, though, is, for example, one of the customers we have, and I'm just amazed by how well they do this. They started the IT part. Now the entire organization does this. In fact, the CEO, the leadership team, every Monday morning, start looking at the OKRs. That's where they start, right?
Oh.
And now you can see that being in the operations part of the organization. And this is an organization that has very high percentage of people looking at OKRs. And you can see now OKRs are not just there for tracking. It's informing how they prioritize their work week by week. throughout the organization. But it started in the IT, but it's now grown throughout the organization because everyone wants to find the purpose. Where I found it struggles, Josh, is, for example, sales, right? They already have sales quotas. They have a way of setting goals already. And trying to change them to think about quotas and stretch goals, that's a transformation. It takes some time, right, to absorb that concept. So there's a friction there because they have been doing goals in a particular way, and suddenly asking them to think about it slightly differently takes a little longer.
Okay, let me ask you one more question that I like to talk about a lot when people talk about goals, and then we'll talk about Microsoft, and I'll maybe a little bit about my book. There's a really fascinating report that came out of the Harvard Business Review. You may have read it, called Goals Gone Wild. Have you ever read that? Does that ring a bell?
I don't reading it. I do.
Okay, what it is. So let me tell you what it is. It's on the internet. It's a meta-analysis of a whole bunch of research on goal setting. And they give you a lot of examples of companies that really destroyed their businesses by creating too many goals. The Wells Fargo sales scandal, the Enron, some of the stuff that happened in Enron, some of the stuff that happened at WorldCom. And what they're trying to get across is that too many goals without thinking about the behaviors and the impact of those goals on other things can create dysfunctional behavior in that part of the company. And I've witnessed some of this back in the MBO days too. How does your OKR model, the way you guys think about it, prevent that kind of thing from happening?
There are two things that are really core to OKRs that seem to make this much better, Josh. I would not claim it has fully solved the problem, right? At the end of the day, it's a tool. How humans use the tool will determine how effective the tool is, right? But OKRs naturally push the humans towards the right behavior, in my opinion. The first one is, as you know well, OKRs actually kind of allow you to focus on, kind of force you, nudge you to focus on 3 to 5 things. So you're not going to jam in 20 things and tell everything is equally important, right? They force the leadership at all levels to prioritize and say, what is for now, what's for next quarter or next year, right? That prioritization helps them understand and focus on a few things. The second thing is transparency. Typically, anyone in the organization can see all the objectives. Of course, you can log certain things. If you're a public company, no one can see certain things, right? But typically, most goals are visible to everyone. And that allows people to see these conflicts well ahead of time, right? And see, wow, this is not congruent with this other thing. And the power of the entire organization comes to resolving those much earlier than later.
Good. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that transparency issue did not exist in a lot of these other companies. They didn't have enough visibility into how this was being used. Okay, one more question that I think everybody's going to be interested in is the Microsoft connection. So you've got these Teams guys and these Viva guys, and they're doing their thing, and you're doing your thing, and all of a sudden you come along and boop, you're part of Teams. What does that mean? How does that make the company better? How does that make Microsoft better? Where do you see that all going? Does everybody create an OKR every time they get into Teams now?
Great question, Josh. The way I think about it, Josh, is Teams is kind of the new browser, right? Most hundreds of millions of people spend time, few hours a day, every day, right, in front of Teams.
Yeah.
So when something as important as why does your work matter, right? OKRs are really about, in my opinion, bringing purpose to work. Most people come to work, they have no idea why they are doing what they are doing, right? So how do you help this person who's just coming in every day, laying bricks one at a time to understand that they're really building a cathedral, right? And staying focused on what matters, right? And you cannot distract them from doing that, right? You cannot say, go to the other tool to understand it. Teams is the natural place where people are doing work now. So what we are really doing is bringing the Viva experiences right into the flow of work. So the way to think about it is, this makes it much easier for people to understand and be engaged with their goals rather than being yet another tool. It is not like you come into Teams, now you have to create a goal, right? But if you already have goals, then you see it right in the context of your work.
So it really is delivering performance management and goal setting in the flow of work in a real integrated way.
That's right. That's right.
Great. Okay. Okay, well, congratulations, and I'm sure people will learn a lot from the book. Do you want me to tell you 2 minutes about my book? Since we're both authors.
I heard you have a new one coming out. Would love to learn more.
Yeah, so what I've been doing, I'm sort of been working on my book for about 7 or 8 years. What I found, and one of the reasons that OKRs are so fascinating to me, is that every company is going through this slow and now faster and faster journey towards a much more distributed, empowered, team-centric organizational model. I was just listening, for example, to a discussion of what's going on at Twitter right now by some employees at Twitter. And the dysfunctions at Twitter have nothing to do with the tech. It's the organization structure. It was the lack of empowerment. It was too much bureaucracy. I mean, you find this all the time. It wasn't the engineers, it wasn't the tech, it was the sort of the management model. And so what I discovered in my research is I poured through thousands and thousands of companies' Glassdoor ratings and looked at lots of data. And I found that in every industry, the high performing, enduring companies, the brands that have survived multiple economic cycles and so forth, manage their people differently. And they distributed authority. They worked, they focused on learning and development. They were transparent with goals and objectives like you guys deliver. They had a strong mission and purpose, and they constantly revisited the mission and made sure people understood it and really made sure that it was relevant. And they focused on productivity and employee experience, not just get more work done, how much stuff have you done today? And they created this, what I call irresistible company, where not only was it a great company to buy stuff from and do business, but the employees really kind of brought their whole selves into the company, and just this energy was unleashed. And I think Microsoft does this, by the way, as you probably know, by nature. And I think, now that I have a whole chapter, by the way, on OKRs in my book, wow. Which you probably haven't read yet. But I think OKRs are a manifestation of this new way of managing people, this new way of running an organization. So I really think your book and my book are probably companions.
Wow. Wow. Josh, I need to run and read your book now. Seriously, that's so exciting. Thank you for writing this book. This is very dear to the concepts you talked about, are very dear to my heart. Right? How do you run really empowered teams, right? How do you provide people context but not tell them what to do, right? I mean, you have to trust people. And how do you move fast? How do you be transparent? It's just amazing that you are actually, through research, reinforcing these principles. I'm going to try to buy the book right after this call.
Okay, well, Vetri, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about this. It sounds like we have a lot of things in common to talk about, and we'll do some more fun things together. And congratulations to you on the business, on Microsoft, and on the book as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Josh. Really appreciate it. All right.